here to call the Board of Public Works public workshop on the wastewater treatment facility to order. We have all the board members are present. The mayor, Andrew Williams, is here, general manager, assistant general manager, and our legal counsel today will be Pete. So what I wanted to do was to go through the comments and the FAQs that we developed out of the last meeting. First, this is the third public workshop we've had, and we plan on having 2 more after this, once a month. So there'll be there'll be 3 more, April, May, and June. And the dates will be in the presentation for everyone. So that we can keep the public informed of the questions, the decision process, and what we've learned. Last meeting, we had 42 people attend in person and about 55 online. So we had a very good turnout, and we had over 30 people provide very detailed comments post-meeting. And we're looking for that same type of response as we go forward. All the comments in their raw form have been posted, and Sharon has made a place on the homepage. On the banner on the homepage on the far right, there's a little building, and it says WWTF. And under there, you'll find all the presentation material, the public comments, and then we distilled the public comments down to 14 FAQs, because there were a lot of comments that either overlapped or touched on the same issues. And I will go through them in a highlight form today. This is a very complex decision. It includes environmental issues, political issues, capital costs, and future costs. And as with all these type of decisions, there are going to be trade-offs that have to be made, because cost and environmental sometimes drive you to different decisions. And we, as your board, are going to be looking to determine the most opportune solution. So the presentation, I'm going to discuss the FAQs. There will be a visual provided in the near term of what option 1 would look like from 3 viewpoints, from Gills Neck, from Savannah, and from along American Legion, so people can actually visualize what the berm sheet pilings would look like from those 3 different view sheds. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get that done before this meeting, but they will be posted as soon as we get them. Then we'll talk briefly about next steps, and then open it up to public comments. So, moving right on to the FAQs. Is option 3A or 3B similar to discussions the county had with Rehoboth? So, while both involve discharge from the county, the Rehoboth decision discussion was strictly about use of their outfall. It did not include treatment. The discussions we're having with the county are pertaining to treatment and discharge. So it's not apples to apples, and we're not necessarily completely privy to what went on inside Rehoboth Beach City Council, but our decision will be based upon discussions we've had with, oh, and I'm sorry, Todd Lawson is here also from the county. So we have Todd and Hans Medler, the county engineer, will be strictly based upon our ratepayers, our environmental issues with the county. A lot of questions about what will happen to the existing wastewater treatment plant. Should option 2 or 3 be chosen? There has been no decision, or frankly, even discussions, other than at a very, very high level, as many of you have raised, on what would go on with that property. The property is jointly titled to both the city of Lewes and the Board of Public Works. So any future use would have to be a mutual decision by the city and BPW. But there are lots of people, you know, talking about solar fields, wind fields, open space. Once we make a decision as to which way we're going to go, that can then be taken up, but it doesn't really influence the decision of how to protect our wastewater treatment operation. But I will say that the facility will be demolished if we go with option 2 or 3, and we'll determine what goes on there afterwards. Several people asked about the correlation between historic beach closures due to bacterial levels and the outfall from our treatment plant. DENREC, and I provided a link in the FAQs, has done a detailed study of each of the beach closures, and all of them have been attributed to agricultural wildlife. They've done, testing on the contamination, and it is not from any of the facility discharges. It's more likely due to birds, animals, farm field runoff, and it's all been tied specifically to high rain events where you get sheet flow off the surface. But I encourage everyone to go to the DENREC site. They've got a lot of information up there on that. What else needs to be addressed should option 1 be chosen? There are several major concerns. The first one is access to the site. And I think, as we discussed at the last meeting, even protecting the plant does not address the site access issues because of Savannah and American Legion Road. So we would need to look at what plans would need to be put in place to get people, fuel, supplies into the facility if it was to be protected by a seawall. Logistics of how to keep an operating facility operational while doing the amount of heavy construction we would be doing, driving sheet pilings, building berms. Having worked on sites where you have an existing facility and you're trying to build a complement to it, it is very complex, and you need to have a lot of pre-planning for that. Sea level rise is more frequent and more intense with recent storms and climate change. So even if we plan for, as GHD presented, sea level rise given the high level curve, subsidence, and 3-foot freeboard, that does not guarantee us that a major storm, as we've seen other places, would not necessarily take us by surprise and overtop the boundaries. So, it's the best planning, but for that site. So people asked about the 2050 time horizon. This is another difficult thing with engineering is choosing a time horizon that both is going to have credible data that you can plan for, but is also going to allow you enough leeway to adjust as you go on. So we chose 2050, the mitigation team chose 2050 for the general BPW assets to try to balance what the forecasts are for climate change and what type of time frame we would be able to readjust the plans for. And I talked about the conservative nature of the sea level rise calculations. Will the city be involved in the decision process? So we have set up meetings with the city, Andrew and Tim, Anne Marie and Glenn, Earl, myself, Mike Hoffman, and Austin, meeting on a bi-weekly or monthly basis to discuss where we're at. We will take into consideration all the city input and concerns. But at the end of the day, the BPW is the responsible decision maker by our charters. So we will wait their decisions along with all of your comments in presenting our plan forward. There's questions on the NRP, the MPDES permit. So the rules with the MPDES permits are that whoever owns the facility discharging has to own the permit. So in option 1 or 2, the BPW would maintain the permit. In option 3, the county would own the permit. And the county would be answerable to the state, just like we are currently answerable to the state on a monthly basis. What we are working on, and I'll go into this more later on, is with the county is putting in place what a draft agreement would look like. And that would include not only, what type of oversight reporting we would get from the county, cost, modifications to the plant down the line, all those type of things to make sure that we had a document that firmly laid out the responsibilities and what we would have. But if we go with option 3, it is a county-owned facility. And, they've agreed that we would have open books and be able to, have, but it would be county run. Has the BPW entertained new wastewater treatment facility designs and methods? So the answer to this is only partially at this point, because option 1, 2, or 3 are independent of what the actual treatment process is. There are newer treatment methods that have been pointed out. And as we move forward, based upon which option we moved forward with, they would be considered. But at this point, we kind of tried to stay at the 30 to 60,000 foot level because we didn't want to spend money on all the options if we could narrow it down and there were certain options that were preferable. has the BPW located a specific site or sites for option 2? And the answer is no. What we did was, we drew a circle, Austin, was it 5 miles around us to keep piping under reasonable limits, and looked at land values. And then we averaged them based on, looking at doing some high level looks at, is the land suitable for building a facility on? But no site has been specifically identified or looked at. There are several potential sites, but that is, once again, something that we would decide if option 2 was where we were going to proceed. Oh, and the other portion of that was that depending upon within option 2, whether we went to spray, discharge to the canal or discharge to the ocean, would grossly impact the amount of acres that were necessary for the facility. And also the suitabilities of the facility. Will the smell of the current plant be diminished?
It's marsh.
Historic, what?
It's marsh grass.
Right. So historically, going back a couple of years, we did have issues with smells coming from the plant. And during the summertime, during high temperature. With our operator, we came up with new operating procedures to ensure that the walls before a weekend in the digester and the EQ tank were washed down so that you didn't have odors coming from there, because that's typically where it was coming from. When there is maintenance done, potentially there are some, but the majority of what is smelled out there is the marsh. And it is tied to low tide. And also DENREC has chimed in on that also. So I don't think at the end of the day, if the plant was demolished and moved away, you would notice any appreciable difference in the smell. I will say that we would be rebuilding pump station 4 and pump station 8 and putting in, just like pump station 4 has odor control
They may not know where they are.
Oh, I'm sorry. Pump station 4 is the one before you go over the canal on Gill's Neck and Savannah, right at the base of the footbridge or the bridge. And pump station 8 is the other major pump station, and it's the one where the this and that shop used to be. I don't know if they're coming back now.
It's still there.
If they're coming back this year, but
Right,
pump
right.
station 8 collects everything from the beach side over. And that facility would need to be rebuilt. So at pump station 4, we do have odor control in now. However, if there's maintenance being done, like we have to go into the pumps or anything else, and we open the wet well, the odor treatment doesn't work. So, but it's the benefit of living around a marsh. Are there concerns over the loss of control by BPW if option 3 is chosen? So just, to reinforce what we've said before, in option 3, BPW would maintain the customer interface, the collection system, the pump stations, the piping within the boundary up to the handshake point where it would be turned over to the county. So we still would be your sewer utility. And it's just like we buy electricity from DMAC when we closed our power plant down. In this case, we would be buying treatment services from the county, but still be the utility. But as I alluded to before, the key to this working out is for the county and the BPW to hammer out an agreement that ties down all the aspects of cost, environmental modifications, treatment, ongoing operation, so that when Hans is gone and I'm gone, there's something, in place for the future. Now, we all know that agreements are subject to disputes, but that's why it's important to spend the time now crafting an agreement that at least covers all the things that we can foresee. The BPW wait and consider which option to pursue in the future. There's several concerns with that. The first one being waiting and seeing puts us at risk for a storm coming in. So we have to do something to address the fact that we know we're in a vulnerable position. Second, the county is going to have to make a decision at some point on what they do. So in 5 years, option 3 probably is not even going to be on the table. And the availability of land for option 2, I mean, we all see the development that's going on around us. If we don't lock up land now, the cost will only go up if we can even find a suitable parcel at that point that isn't a large distance away. So we have land acquisition, storms, and option 3 has an expiration date on it. Now, that expiration date is not tomorrow, but we have a couple of months to work through this. The impact of climate change on infiltration. So as part of the mitigation team, the press has led up, we have highlighted the fact that we do have an infiltration issue, especially on the beach side, but also in other places, and are looking to put in watertight manholes, watertight covers on the pump stations that are below grade, and raise structures that control those things above floodplain. So there are control stations for all the pump stations and SCADA. Inflow into the system is also due to coming from existing houses that have drains, showers, toilets, etc., floor drains, well, hopefully not floor drains, but showers and toilets that are below the flood elevation. Now, that's not inside BPW's purview. That is a city issue. And, we are talking with the city about that because, that is a risk. Now, the plans that we have currently in place is that if an area was subject or forecast to be flooded, that we would shut down and isolate that portion during the storm event so that we kept the wastewater treatment plant up. Because, and I'll use the term again, the buggies don't necessarily like salt water. We use a biological process in the anaerobic and aerobic portion of the digesters. And those bugs, and we saw it over the cold period of time. We had the the bugs started to catch a cold. And we had foaming and other issues at the plant. So, Press can talk more detail about this. I'm just a nuclear engineer. And the other area of infiltration is due to groundwater level increase. So many of our pipes are below groundwater level. And we have a program in place to inspect lines and either replace or line them to reduce the amount of inflow into the pipes that are subterranean. And I think we've seen a gradual decrease in the I&I, haven't we, Austin?
Yeah, and when we're using like clay pipes and, thank you, Robin. When the clay pipe's in good shape, we'll do basically, we'll cement line it. But for the most part, Infomark's guys take care of monitoring pump run time. So, and we've talked about going to a more in-depth SCADA system so that we can monitor, for example, flow, and we're trying to put flow meters on all our pump stations so that we can monitor during heavy rain events, where do we see that increase in flow, not just necessarily off of run time, but you can actually see it off of flow. So step by step.
So yes, there is an important aspect of climate change that's going to impact outside flooding, just the operation. How can I stay updated on future discussions and reports? As I said, on the homepage, you'll find a button there, and Sharon does an excellent job of keeping everything posted and up to date on there. And so I think before I move on, from the board's perspective, is there anything else on the FAQs that anyone wants to?
I had one conversation with, when I was at the gym, talking to Sumner. He wasn't at the gym, I was at the gym. You want to pose the question?
Big.
On? Yeah. Oh, my sense is you're the person to answer the question. I laid this out the first time I sat in this room and heard the preliminary presentation.
Sumner, do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, sure. Sumner Crosby, citizen Lewis, 558 Powelltown Road. So I live on the canal. In fact, Todd keeps his boat right next to my dock. I guess what I'll do is I'll put a little background on this. I think the quality of the canal is super important. And every time I hear BPW talk about the work, the performance of this plant, I always think of pristine. I think of high quality, state of the art. It's in that document. And not knowing the details of what the county is imagining, I always worry when I see we have this much room in the flow that is unused right now, below the maximum flow level in the permit, in the MPDF permit. And I couldn't find it this afternoon, but I remember there being some graphic that had to do with increasing concentrations within that increased flow. And to me, that's sort of a multiplier of ultimate load, ultimate pounds or ounces or whatever you want of nitrogen, of phosphorus, perhaps of colonies of bacteria. So part of the question, and maybe you guys have answered this already, or maybe you haven't, is what, we have a flow rate here. You would imagine adding a flow rate to it. How do we keep everything within reason? I'd hate to see the canal quality decrease. I worked for EPA for a number of years, just across the room from where the permit writers worked for MPDF. They periodically ask for my help on things. So I have some sense of what goes into writing a permit. But I'm just concerned that we will see degradation in the water quality in the canal and ultimately maybe along the beaches, working all the way down to the Cape. And I realize dilution helps a lot, but we don't really know. So part of the question has to do with when do you do modeling? What kind of modeling can answer this question? Or do you need modeling in order to answer the question? So yes, that's probably good enough. I'm just worried about the multiplier of increased flow from joining two sources through time and perhaps increased concentrations being released in those flows.
Sumner.
You have a feeling over 3A versus 3B then? Constructed wetlands versus.
Well, like,
discharge?
you know, I think what gets to the heart of my concern here is a number of things in that document speak about things that need to be further evaluated before we really know. And so I wasn't aware until I had the conversation with Earl this afternoon that you are just trying to maybe see if any of these we can push aside so that you can focus, as you just suggested, Tom, on the next level of analysis. So I'm all for that. I thought maybe you guys were going to be trying to pick something in the next couple of weeks.
No.
And say, here we are. We can't answer this question and we can't answer that question, but we're going to go forward with option X.
No.
So the constructed wetland question, like the document suggests, I mean, and just like the challenge of finding a suitable place to do spray irrigation, you know, it comes down to finding a site that really meets the demand for, you know, the wetland. And having also worked next to the wetland folks at EPA, constructed wetlands is a whole art in addition to being a science. So, I mean, do we have any experience with constructing wetlands? Yeah.
Are we ready for some answers?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I'm happy to share my thoughts about 3A, 3B, but maybe it doesn't have to happen right now.
Well, and the other thing, maybe Hans, you could talk about this also, is that while someone's right, an increase in flow, an increase of loading, but we're also talking about the outgoing time, which will,
There's a couple of things,
yeah,
but
so at that
Actually,
point.
one more thing. Maybe you can help me understand this. Both of the watersheds, if you pull up a map of the watersheds that DENREC uses in its water quality assessments, each of the watersheds that join somewhere near where this outfall is have TMDLs associated with them, strict limits for nitrogen and phosphorus bacteria. And I don't quite understand. I know we ship waste to somewhere in Pennsylvania to offset some of the nitrogen contribution, which suggests that we're somehow connected with the inland bays, Rehoboth Bay TMDL. What's not clear is what limits might be associated with the Broadkill River. So that's another piece.
so maybe because it's fresh on my mind, can we touch that one first?
Sure.
Yes, of course, the Broadkill has a TMDL just like the Rehoboth Bay. But what little I know about the initial side, let's say, limited study indicated that none of the water would end up going upstream the Broadkill into the Broadkill watershed. As a matter of fact, the study results as reflected in the permit, and I trust you've read the Lewes Board of Public Works permit.
Actually, I haven't read the details. I've seen the
right.
parameters.
No, it's not a trick question by any stretch. No, because the permit reflects the results of the limited study, that the 2.5% of the flow of the plant, which now is continuous, ends up in the Rehoboth Bay, 97.5% ends up in the Delaware Bay. So that's what the nutrient shipment, whatever it has a special name. It's yeah, right. So there's an offset which is spelled out in the permit. It's based on that I would say, limited study results. So when we looked at the, if option 3 is to be considered, and by the way, option 2, whatever you want to, which one's the one which has to continue discharge? I think it was 2B. There's a continued discharge under this 2 series. They both need to look at the ability to discharge to the body of water, let's say, less impaired. So if the Delaware Bay is the less impaired, which it currently is, then a discharge to the less impaired water changes the TMDL loadings. And you know that because you know the science behind it. So that sort of answers that. Now, what perplexed me a little bit, you said the concentration would also increase. That is absolutely not the case. In this one slide we had, did you see the original slide?
So somewhere in there, I need to talk on my slides. I thought I'd seen something that actually showed an increase in concentration. I went back looking for it this afternoon. I couldn't find it.
No,
So maybe it will be that it's not the case,
Yeah.
but I think still it's important to consider the fact that on a pounds basis or whatever mass you want to choose, the increased flow, even at a constant concentration, results in greater.
No, the slide actually has the loadings and the concentration in it. The loadings are the bars and the concentrations are embedded as numbers. So that's probably the one you want to take a look at.
Right.
But what I was talking to Earl earlier was I see a lot of people compare the 2050 numbers under any scenario, 2 or 3, with the 2023 numbers under 1. And that's an unfair comparison by any stretch, because even under today's facility, which is a state-of-the-art membrane facility, but it's running at less than 50%. Once you load that baby up to 100%, it will not produce the same concentrations. So that is just the nature of the facility. And, there's a threshold when treatment plants need a certain base flow to perform well because they're biological. Once you reach that base flow, they get better as they go, as they push forward, and then they reach a point depending on the technology. And membrane technology is the more you load a membrane up, obviously the more it's going to go through eventually. So different processes, you can load up to 100% and they perform equally well. And I'm probably not telling you anything new. But the key thing is that particular slide spells out all the scenarios and it looks at the 2050 comparison versus the 23 against the 2050. Because that's really what we have to. And, if you wanted to compare the performance of a facility of 2023, once our South Coastal upgrade is fully completed, I would pin it against the membrane plant any day.
Thank you.
Okay,
Any other?
any other questions? Anyone online?
Very good.
And- Barbara, and then
Aaron.
First of all, Barbara Curtis, Ship Carpenter Square, Lewis. And I want to thank you for not making a decision without having more information. I really breathed a sigh of relief when I got here tonight. So thank you. The issue of the infiltration into the treatment works because of sea level rise and more storms and stuff, that doesn't seem to be particularly relevant to decision making because it's infiltration into the sewage pipes. And regardless, those pipes, whether they deliver to the county or to a new facility or to the old facility, it's the same issue. So I think you can kind of knock that off as a a decision factor. Got a lot of other things I could comment on, but not right now.
And I agree with you. It was just one of the things that came up numerous times in the comments. And so we created, a response to that. But you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
That's going to be there regardless and of who's treated.
If I may, Bob, how are you doing?
Hi, good.
You and I agree on a lot of things. I disagree with this one because dilution is the enemy of chloride. So if you stay with the option one, your flow will always be at that level. So you will have a lot less flow, but you will have the same infiltration coming and the same inflow coming off the beach. If you combine it with our current flow plus the future flows, we probably end up with a 2-to-1 better dilution to the chlorides. So, and I know this because chlorides are the arch enemy of spray irrigation. If you were to build the spray irrigation option under 2 and do not take any extra flow from us, you will be suffering the chloride death in 2050.
Okay,
Because
that
you
brings
will-
me up to another one of
Because
my,
you will kill anything and everything you're trying to grow.
thank you. That brings me up to another one of my questions, which is the constructed wetlands. Can you discharge to them year round, or is it the same kind of issue as spray irrigation where in the winter it's not really very efficient and you're going to need an outflow anyway? I think it would be nice to have that clarified as well.
And that, if I may, and that really goes back to your question about what do we know today and what don't we know today. So EPA has standards for constructed wetlands. But what they are constructed wastewater treatment wetlands. This is what we're building and proposing is, it's not even in the same league. Because right now at Inland Bays, we just started construction. We're building constructed effluent polishing wetlands for no other reason but to remove nitrogen and phosphorus. There's no standard for it. There's no permit for it. It is what is considered a non-point reduction because you're further reducing the load which would otherwise be discharged. So Barbara, you're 100% right. Because you discharge year-long. The planned uptake is going to be highest during the summer months. But the reduction in the effluent will be consistent, only the percentage will change. There's certain percent will always work even in the wintertime. So, and there's a discharge. Yes, that wetland is not like a complete vertical. It has a vertical component and it has a horizontal component. And the studies we were referring to, we have to evaluate the soils, but we also have to evaluate the tidal actions and how you can time that hydraulic profile through the wetlands with the tides. That's actually a challenging hydrodynamic question, which I sort of enjoy, but
That's why we like it.
probably the vast majority of the population will probably be bored to death. That's sort of in my past, so it can be done. I think it can be done effectively. We've had some just initial conversations with the regulatory branch and sort of weighing their interest because we had long conversation about the wetlands we're building at Inland Bays. And they actually asked us to contribute groundwater to the wetlands. Did you know that? Because the groundwater under Inland Bays treatment plant is 3 times as high as nitrogen as what we discharge. So the wetlands will be fed with 50% groundwater and 50% effluent. And even to get a bigger bang for your buck, you probably should feed them with all groundwater, but we have to get rid of our water. So I asked the state if they wanted to double the facility, we can certainly do that for them, and they didn't want to do that either. But so there is this hydrodynamic component to it, which deals with the horizontal discharge. The state wants to evaluate other options on the vertical side because the state has no single well injection, and some of the regulatory folks I talked with said, hey, why don't you consider a wetland and groundwater injection in addition to the horizontal flow. So this will be a very interesting study and it will take years. I mean, once a decision is made on a 3B between the canal study and the on-site studies, if it's done in 2 years, I'd be surprised.
So, Hans, can you maybe expand a little bit? The NPDS permit would be based upon the discharge from the plant before the wetlands, correct?
That is
That's what
correct.
the concept is.
That's very good, Mr. Nuclear. And that has to do with the point of compliance. Because performance is measured at the point of compliance. Whatever you do afterwards is above and beyond, which does not get credited in the point of compliance calculations.
You start a new permit, then if you take it over?
We would have a new permit, but we would have the same waste load allocation. Because we just been through the waste load allocation transfer on Western Sussex, where we, the county, took over the waste load allocation in the town of Bridgeville Greenwood system. And that waste load allocation was transferred in whole to the city of Seaford. So, and from the same, that's sort of in the same vein, the EPA looked at this, it was one of the fastest EPA approvals I've ever seen, because it was a no-brainer because we're moving the same pound load to a more beneficial point in the watershed. So it happened in literally weeks. And on the other hand, here, I would expect a similar acceptance because all of a sudden we can with definite answer or definity say, discharging on outgoing tide removes the entire guesswork on what is the split. So the watershed benefit is obvious to the layman and to the expert.
But then the concern about the discharge on the outgoing tide is that you're cutting the period of time when you can discharge in half and you're doubling. So that's kind of like quadrupling the volume that goes through the canal.
That is true.
And we have some living shorelines in the canal that are being constructed. And what's the impact going to be on that? What about the level of water? What happens when there's a storm, a nor'easter, and the flow is coming into the canal on both high and supposed low tides?
And that part of the hydrodynamic model on the canal itself, because that will analyze the erosion capacity of the various velocities under the different scenarios. So if you ever read some model, I mean, like it's a great project and
Yeah.
it may actually make me stay longer than I actually ever planned to work.
Thank you.
But, Hans, can you talk a little bit about, never mind, yes.
So, given what you just said, I don't know how to do the calculation, and then I know how to do it on paper, but I don't know what the numbers are. Given what Barbara just asked about the quadrupling, what do you imagine the discharge would be as a percentage of flow going by the pipe?
Yeah, but that's exactly the question. You see, like if the velocities in the overall velocity profile of the canal stay well below the one necessary to cause the erosion, then you're perfectly fine. But if you're approaching that, then you have to weigh, do we really want to discharge everything on the outgoing tide, or did you only want to discharge 75% of it? But that only a model can answer that. I cannot answer that. From a rough idea, what I feel, it should be possible, because during a high tide event, a storm event, the velocities in the canal are much, much higher than we could ever generate. But I don't know how erosive they are already on a high tide, on a storm tide. That's why I don't want to say yes or no. I have my inclination, but needs to be proven.
So one of the other things to follow in on that is that can you talk about what the capacity of the storage lagoons would be to be able to take multiple sequential high tides.
That's an excellent point. I think it speaks to Summers and Barbara's we would still have the ability to discharge on the outgoing tide allows you to, you can only do this if you have storage, which we do. So we have so much storage that during a storm event, we wouldn't discharge at all for days on end. Because for that reason, you don't want to, let's say, double down on having to increase the velocities in the canal above and beyond the storm velocities. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to point out, we at BPW don't have the ability to change our process to discharge on the outgoing tide because we don't have the room to put the lagoons in. And we also are low lying, so the lagoons would all have to be above grade. So that option, as far as I know, is not even something we could foresee. I mean, otherwise, the obvious question is, why don't we discharge on the outgoing tide? And the answer is that, you know, given the land that we currently have and the location of it, that's not even a feasible option.
And in addition, Tom, if you were to build the state-of-the-art facility envisioned under 2, it's not going to come with 10 million gallon lagoons. That's just, we just inherited them. That's almost like it's a beneficial legacy. Wolf Neck happens to have gigantic lagoons.
Other comments?
Mark Prouty, I live over in Wolf Point. I just had a couple of questions about, I don't see written anywhere, and maybe I just missed it. What is the treatment system that you're considering to modify the Wolf Neck plant?
I had a pretty good idea until I talked to Barbara.
I mean, I hear the having the effluent go through wetlands, but is the effluent going through activated sludge prior to that?
After 43 years of treatment plan designs, you know, like I am a BNR type of guy. So the biological nutrient removal system is sort of, I've designed a number of plants myself. And, you know, like I've designed plants which were on the phosphorus sensitive side, the Bardenfloor. I have 2 Bardenfloor plants I designed, and I designed a series of normal BNR plants, the D-Night plants.
Okay.
And, but that was before I talked to her.
Well, I don't disagree with the use of something like Biolac or something like that.
No, Biolac is not nearly as good as what we can produce today
Okay.
on a BNR. But
The reason I bring it up is because there'll be sludge generated,
Mhm.
and I was wondering what your thinking is on the sludge management side of it.
We have, maybe not everybody knows that's this the Lewes Board of Public Works, and the county have a biosolids handling agreement, which is actually laid out for the ultimate capacity. We have a large dryer facility at Inland Bays, and we handle all of Lewis's sludge, and we handle all of Seaford's. We handle pretty much everybody except Millsboro and Selbyville.
Okay, so that would be continued. I'm thinking
Yeah.
about this because of the operational costs that DPW may be incurring in the future. And
That's baked in. That's a very in-depth question. The maintenance cost under the 2 series and the 1 series assumes that the regional biosolids agreement will continue in the 2050 time horizon. So otherwise your 2 and 1 series cost on the operation side would be more expensive if the county said, we don't like you anymore, we don't want your solids.
I see.
But that's, you know, it's.
And the only other comment I had was regarding alternative 1, the modification to the existing plant at the existing site. I noticed in the report that only 1 alternative was discussed. I don't know if other alternatives were considered for hardening a plant at that site and what kind of costs could be used. There are certainly other types of treatment that could be put there. I don't necessarily think it's the best place for the treatment plant, but at the same time, when you're going to be negotiating costs with the county, having one cost at 30 million and the other at 9, it puts you at a disadvantage when maybe one of them could be more like 12 million or something like that. So,
Are you suggesting replacing the facility in place?
yes, at least a study of the cost to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we discussed it, the problem is that we have a finite amount of space
Mhm.
and we have to continue to treat.
Right.
So
I
demolition and building a new facility on the current site wasn't really something that we considered because it's logistically just not feasible.
Well, in my history, I've done it, and on a small site like that, it was even more crowded. If you look at the town of Berlin, Maryland. And so it's not an impossibility. Again, don't get me wrong, I think that going to the county is a good focus. I just think that in negotiating the costs, this huge detriment that we start with saying, well, we'll take anything because these other costs for other alternatives are so high. I don't think that's it.
We can certainly look into that, but it seems like there's a lot of difficulties with trying to rebuild, on top of the fact that you're rebuilding in exactly the same place. You can build your buildings taller, but you still have the site access issues and everything else.
That's exactly right, Tom. Yes.
So,
Thank you.
I mean,
I actually started the design in Berlin on that plant until Annie took it over the design.
Oh, really?
sure.
I apologize to throw all this stuff on you. I was gone the whole time that you guys had the first 2 meetings. So I appreciate the fact that you've got several more meetings. In the conversation I had with Earl, I think it would be great. if There were even more people engaged in this process. I don't know how to whip them up and make sure they understand what's going on, because as press said, or was quoted in the paper, this is the biggest decision you guys are gonna make.
Definitely.
Looking through all the comments that you referred to that are in that packet that Sharon's posted now. There are a lot of questions about costs. And from what you guys just said about sort of stages of assessment, I'm wondering if you guys can explain some of these numbers that are in the thing now, because it seems like they're sort of apples to oranges. It sort of builds on what Mark was just saying. To me, it was kind of interesting that there were these flat $20 million numbers that went with threes. And then there were sort of more specific, not so round numbers in the other categories. And just from what I gather, there's still a lot of detail that needs to be put into those before you put hard numbers, unless you just said Lewes is only liable for $20 million and that's that.
Our current agreement says so.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I mean, the reason why part of that explanation is that option 1 and 2, Lewes BPW would be on the hook for the entire cost. Option 3, the county is going to upgrade Wolf Neck one way or the other for their needs, and has agreed that we would pay on a per gallon basis the same way we charge the county for treating theirs now. So the reason why there's such a disparity, it's not that the county is going to build that facility for $20 million. That's the county's budget. That $20 million is replacing two major pump stations, demolishing the existing plant, upgrading the pipe to the handshake point.
Okay, so it's all the hardware, it's all the capital expenses and so on to get to the point you've got the handshake.
Yeah,
Right.
the handshake
The
point.
the current agreement says you're responsible for this side, you're responsible for this.
And then the rates will be determined.
The rates will be determined on a flow basis.
And just to amplify from the prior meetings, that rate would be based upon if we use 50% of the capacity of the plant and the county uses 50%, the cost of operating that plant would be 50-50.
Right.
If we go down to 40% and they're 60, it would be, so it's not like you're going on the open market. It's their actual cost. And that's where, going back to this agreement, we'd have to lay out open books, be able to review, have a say in future modifications to the plant that were going to come back and cost us, those type of things. So that's the part that still needs to be worked out.
So then, of course, there's the whole question, and there were a lot of comments about this. I know the first meeting, when you guys first presented this, there were a number of people who commented, and they were concerned about different ways that we make decisions about land use change. How does that work moving forward? Are we going to cap? Are we going to express a maximum number of gallons that we could ever imagine shipping to Wolf Neck?
Well-
And then how do you work that out? You're both changing through time
Well,
in terms of your demands for treatment. So how does that work as time goes?
both
on?
organizations spend a lot of time, and what we've agreed is that our future needs at build out would be 1.75 million gallons. The counties would be 1.75. So the facility would be built to 3.5 million. Now, the fluctuations in there would be pro rata, but the design basis that we're using for option 3 is 3.5 million, 50-50 split.
We have a 20-year projection, so we're not looking at 2050, we're looking at the 2040s. And we have a number we need to meet in order to provide sewer capacity for our customers. Just like we have similar analysis like the Lewes Public Works.
Given all the changes, and IG refers to you as the wizard. For all the things that you do to create this amazing system you're describing. I don't think he would mind if I said that, maybe he's in the room. There's no doubt, Eastern Sussex County is growing and will continue to grow. Could you imagine a scenario, and maybe it happens in 2050, when you exceed that 3.5 or whatever that number was, million gallons? What do you do then? Do you have the ability to add there? I'm just wondering how Lewes ends up being squeezed. Right now, we're in charge of our future, subject to the realities of sea level rise, and everybody who knows me knows I've talked a lot about sea level rise, so I very much appreciate why we're here talking about this. But
Hans,
how do we get, long term, are we sure that we'll always have what we need if we hand it over?
so I was going to say the last meeting that we were in, Hans kind of hit it on the head. So growth in what I would deem as like the Lewes general vicinity, most of that growth is actually artesian growth. Once you, and you can hit on this, is that where do you see most of Sussex County's growth when it comes to your sewer territory?
That's too, and obviously Austin and I talk a lot about these things. So I can talk about the sewer side of growth. I do not want to talk about the land use side of growth. That's his job.
You're like DelDOT, you serve, you've solved the problem.
We have a rule given to the engineering department. That means do not expand the sewer district before a land use decision has been made. This rule is named after our previous Councilman Cole. It's the Cole rule. So none of my staff shows up before county council unless the land use decision has been made. So I don't want to get involved in that discussion and let our administrator talk about it. But the flow discussion, there's two aspects to this. 2/3 of our growth in eastern Sussex happens south of the inlet. 85%, 90% of our discussion about growth happens north of the inlet. And I cannot explain why this is, but that I don't think I've ever talked to anybody in Bethany about growth, or Millville for that matter. But I've talked to dozens and dozens of people from the Lewes Rehoboth area about growth. So, and that's flow growth, not land use growth. So, and the second one is right now, a several million gallon facility is being permitted and will be built on Route 30, and it's artesian wastewater resources, and it has tremendous growth potential. The majority of the sewer permits issued in the north of the canal are not issued by the county or issued by the municipalities. They're issued by the artesian wastewater resources. So I cannot speak to their planning, but they're a for-profit. I hope they have it planned well, because their shareholders will not like it if they don't.
Okay, I mean, you understand what I'm asking. You know, if we hand over the keys, how do we make sure we're covered?
That 1.75, that's your number.
But is that the number? Because I gotta work for,
Yeah.
What happens down the line?
Want to talk about the way EDUs was calculated and all?
Yeah, so I kind of worked off of Charlie's study that was done in 2015. Knowing that there are several parcels that originally were included in that study, that through our agreement with Hans, that flow is actually going to Sussex County and being credited on the backside as we accept flow down Gills Neck Road. So for example, White's Pond is actually, that flow is going through Schofield and going to Sussex County. Ultimately, we would most likely receive that on the back end through the Gills Neck Road corridor. But utilizing the same stuff that was done under that 2015 study, the sewer service territory was determined and delineated kind of in the mid 2000s, I believe. And so since then, we kind of have a hard line on who serves what. And the only way to change that is to go back and start from scratch.
The line's actually represented in the comprehensive plan adopted by both entities, the city and the county. It's a pretty hard line, who serves what. So I think the Lewes Board of Public Works was in the enviable situation that they could actually establish a ceiling. You're right, we cannot establish a ceiling, but I can see what's left. And I can see Artesian holds the majority of the CPCNs, the certificates. So I have sort of a ceiling I'm looking at, but not as hard as the board.
All right, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Barbara, I think we had Aaron also in the back. Okay.
Kind of following up on Mark's issue about option one. I think there is another scenario that was mentioned in some of the comments, and that's that we do a little bit of hardening at the existing plant, you know, not spend the whole estimated costs that the consultant put together, but enough to get us through the next 10 years or so. And meanwhile, look at other options for wastewater treatment, that sort of thing. And I think all of the costs that the consultant put together for option one and option two are kind of very much back of the envelope costs, and people may not realize that. For instance, you know, for option two, saying we need 20 acres. Well, what's the size of our treatment plant now? How many acres do we have?
It's about 6.73.
Yeah, so we don't necessarily need 20 acres, and that affects the overall cost. And those things aren't clear to people when they look at the costs and what the burden would be for the other options. And I think that needs to be communicated.
And I think just to point that out, just because I know GHD is online, but I believe GHD looked at a particular process that was not an MBR process. Since we have the MBR facility, we don't have the storage, we don't have the lagoons, et cetera. So our footprint is much smaller. but it hinders us at the same time. So they benchmarked it off of a totally separate system or totally different system. And that's how they benchmarked the 20 acres.
Which would have the clarification.
Correct.
Clarifiers add significant area.
Yeah.
So they would pretty much add several acres for that size facility.
which we wouldn't necessarily build. So, yeah. Hmm? Yeah, no, I'm
No.
sorry, in option 2. There are other options, newer technology that don't take up so much space.
Barbara, we are all prisoners of our past.
Yes, we are. Thank you.
Any other comments? Anything from the, yeah. Aaron?
Oh,
Aaron Musharsh with the Cape Gazette. Thank you for having me. I'm going to kind of have questions about each option. The first one I thought of when you were discussing the insurance plan, and I'm wondering how much does the current wastewater treatment plant cost, or as is or bare minimum operating?
that number's in there. Oh, geez.
Well, it's $2 million.
Yeah, if you take in current operations, the cost of chemicals, the operations and maintenance contract, the solids handling, and everything else pertinent to it.
Yeah, it's just a little bit more than 2 million, if I remember correctly.
Okay, is the current insurance policy on the wastewater treatment plant enough to cover that should a catastrophe happen, the worst case scenario played out? Is there enough of insurance coverage?
So we have our current insurance that we hold as, Lewes Board of Public Works policy. And then through the operations and maintenance contract, we have insurance that's through Inframark. And that's all looked at. Like I said, it's pretty buttoned up.
Okay.
And the rest is covered by, our cash reserves,
Okay. My second question would be for option 2. Is the well field at any? Is there any threat from saltwater intrusion in any of the well fields?
So there's a lot of eyes and ears on this topic. I can tell you that we just went through the process of renewing our water allocation permit, and through that, we have to come up with a saltwater intrusion plan, which includes monitoring wells. And so we're kind of at the start of that process. We actually discussed it a little bit today, and we're working towards creating a plan when that day and time comes. But one of the things that I would tell you is that holistically, we look at it from, we have the interconnection with Tidewater, and that's there for, when or if that day comes. We've talked about it on the opposite side of town as an added level of redundancy. So it's being looked at, and I think this is kind of peeling back the layers of the onion.
Okay.
Yeah, and so just to reinforce, Austin said this before, we're very, very lucky. Our forefathers, when they located the well field, probably chose the best spot on the lowest. And the other thing is that, I think people have heard this before also. The major concern for saltwater intrusion is from the canal, not from the ocean.
Okay.
So it's Canary Creek coming back in that way. And as Austin said, we are looking to put in monitoring wells to give us some heads up on that. But
And also the wellhead protection study that's being
Oh,
done as
yeah.
well.
that's a good point. We have authorized the state to update the wellhead protection map, but that's probably a year off.
Okay, thank you for the thorough answer. The reason why I also asked was because one of the options in option 2A, if you were to go with spray irrigation, that would require a substantial amount of land. Might that land be land that you need to use in the future in order to secure your drinking water? Just didn't know if that's been talked about or thought about.
I don't know if there's enough land around that general vicinity.
Yeah, I don't think, I I mean, obviously, we speak at county council about, what's going on at Kings Highway because as it impacts the wells, we're always on the outlook for that. We certainly wouldn't put a spray pond on top of our well field.
Okay, and I think this last question was answered, and it has to do with the county's options. But, and again, I literally don't know crap, so.
The bathrooms outside.
The flow agreement kind of seems like a support system. If you were to go to the county and there were to be problems with Wolf Neck, what is the backup plan? Is there a backup plan for problems with Wolf Neck?
Yes, we do have the ability to divert flow. You don't.
Okay, all right. All right, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
But I mean, just to follow on, we have no backup plans right now.
Yeah,
So,
yep.
Barbara?
I want to thank all of you for the outstanding presentation and all your hard work. I'm so glad I'm not sitting in any of your seats. But no, I don't want that seat. I have a tough enough seat for me anyway. But I think a lot of people in Lewis are, they look at big pictures of stuff. And when you talk about everything that you're talking about, and as well engineered as all these options are, they're somewhat limited, for all the conditions that have already been mentioned. But I just, if you step back or you take that high view down, and all the information that we have available to us, if any of you, watch some of these phenomenal shows on TV, I mean, our oceans are all struggling. I mean, humans do horrible things to the world and to the land and to people, etc. But and I think there's no answer. I'm sure there's no answer for it, but it's of concern when you talk about, dumping water, even though it's processed and everything else, into the oceans or the bays or the area around here that we're really concerned about. It's pretty distressing. And I guess it's hard, I can follow what you're saying, but I don't have science training. And is there any conversation or any higher level studies they're doing on a more global or larger area? Like, we're not the only town that's doing this stuff. And I was talking to a fellow that likes to take his kayak or his canoe out and fish into the Rehoboth Canal. Now they're living in Rehoboth now, but he said there are so many months of the year that when you go out into the canal, it's just thick, murky looking. Now, if you go out there to fish in the winter, probably early spring, maybe very late fall into the winter, you can see to the bottom. And that happens every year. And, that's an effect that he can observe. And so it's hard to imagine that what we're doing, whatever it is, isn't also being somewhat done by enough other areas of the world and around us and Rehoboth, that there's going to be a long range impact. We won't be here to see it, but it just concerns me that if there was any, and has there been any contact with the University of Delaware? Do they do any studies along these lines with the science that they have? Because I know they're doing a lot of stuff on growing materials and semi-salt water and stuff like that. And maybe this is too abstract a question, but it so just concerns me. I think it concerns a lot of people, probably most of you as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up very good points, and the problem is that, or the difficulty is that it's being left too myopic of a view versus coordinated on a regional, national, international basis.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if your networking system takes you far enough afield or even just within southern Delaware that you're.
Barbara, I'll take this one on a bit. I mean, we annexed in Donovan Smith because the alternative is septic fields.
Yeah, I know.
So the reality is this is a safer alternative to what we've have in the county now, which is mounds and septic fields.
Mhm.
Yeah,
If I may double on the mayor's.
Yeah,
I'm gonna go out on a limb here. I'm gonna go out on this limb because we've recently looked into it quite detailed. We, the county, were created to have a central sewer system to take on-site systems off the table. Our first system we created in the 70s was, you would never guess, Dewey Beach. Dewey Beach with its tiny little lots had on-site wastewater treatment.
mhm.
Second one we had was Bethany Beach. I used to be the town engineer in Bethany Beach for a long time. So
Gave that up?
that was a great gig. But so when you fast forward this, we just did a 12-year snapshot. Would we take hundreds of systems off through our remediation projects? I venture to say that a significant portion, close to half of our permits we issue on the north side of the Indian River are remediation ones. So when you look at the pound for pound going into the inland bays, our remediation efforts by far exceed what we spray on the ground. So your friend would be not seeing the bottom any time of the year if it weren't for thousands and thousands of on-site systems we took off.
Yeah, and just one second. Just to follow up on what Andrew said, the city has been very good about annexing or issuing waivers for us to serve wastewater to get people off of septic,
Mhm,
because septic is by far environmentally the worst option,
mhm,
especially when you're in an area as we are.
mhm.
So, I mean, that's a good cooperative, looking at
Right.
what's in the best interest, not only of BPW, the city, but the environment and getting people off of this, off of septic systems.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping you would have given me an answer that provided more hope, but I understand. I mean, you can only do so much and you're working with limited land and everything else. I mean, and you kind of have to just solve the problems for today and in the somewhat.
Barbara, we've come a long way. I mean,
I
my
know.
first job, and I'll just make this quick, was with the predecessor of Denrick. And my first thing to do was to promulgate septic regulations. And my first area was Sussex County, because there was no regulations here then on anything. And you wouldn't believe the fight I had trying to convince people that these regulations were a good thing. And that was to build septic systems. That's how far we've come.
Yeah, I know, and life is amazing. I mean, this is a different subject, but we don't have height regulations in anywhere in Sussex County until somebody builds a monster building. And then all of a sudden, Rehoboth gets height regulations, Lewes gets height regulations. It's just it's how humans operate. They're reactive.
So to give you another example of, so I just got back from Costa Rica.
Good for you.
No, it's not good to me. I'm back. The government has allocated $2 billion to build wastewater treatment facilities in the northern part of the country where all the tourists are at the beaches, because they are almost 100% on septic.
Oh
But,
If you use trash cans there instead of toilets.
but,
my.
I mean, Costa Rica is very, very progressive. They outlawed all plastic bags 2 years ago. I mean, they have, a recycling, but that's really what is needed, because every 6,000 person municipality going its own, there is no coordinated effort about where the biggest bang for your buck is and how to accomplish it, and, it's the collective good.
Yeah, in hindsight, we really admire countries or even areas of within a state, that have been really progressive, have been able to get that through, have had public support to do that. It's kind of unfortunate, as we all know, that most change is an uphill battle. And right, wrong, or indifferent, and it's unfortunate that's how it works. But I think you've done with what you have and what I think you've done a really good job. And I think it's very challenging, and you've got some really good people, to assist in the process. And I wish you a lot of luck.
But, one of the things that you said was dumping things into the canal and wet and water. Correct me if the scientist can correct me if I'm wrong, but basically what we're doing is processing it so that we're putting water into the canal, which is way, way more pure than what's already there.
Well,
We're not putting sewage into the canal.
well, no, I assumed you weren't, but it's just interesting that this friend of ours, was saying that, how cloudy and the water is when this area is fully populated with tourists, Rehoboth and Lewes, and
Well,
moving on down. And so, there's a population aspect to this challenge too. And there's a building aspect to this. I mean, Lewis, you start to think about annexing, not annexing, there's all these pros and cons, all these decisions. Now, of course, the county just loves to build. And so every time trees get cut down and new developments pop up, right? And everywhere you drive, everywhere you look, I don't know what you guys are gonna do, but it's gonna impact Lewis, whatever it is.
So just, and there's,
You want me to get off?
there's a lot of truth to what you said, and, buffering, land use, all of that impacts it. However, time of the year and clarity of the canal, there is a tremendous tie between temperature and clarity. I mean, the water
That's-
is
yeah, that's a good
generally
point, yeah.
clearer when it's
Mhm.
cold,
Mhm, that's
because things don't grow as much. And then as it warms up, you get algae blooms, or not necessarily toxic algae, but just algae blooms, plankton, things like that. So, being a scuba diver, I definitely see that, when you go into cold water, it's crystal clear. It's refreshing, but it's crystal clear.
Yeah, well, that's a very good point. That's my other thing, is that you have to make sure you incorporate as much science as you can on all your decisions. Because, science is like math. 2 and 2 is always 4, and otherwise you can be clouded with opinions.
One of the things that Sumner Crosby and I noticed is that the water by my dock is cleaner than the water by his dock, which is further down the canal. That's not science by any stretch of imagination, but your point I get. You're asking us to reach higher and further and deeper to do a better job. And I applaud that.
Well, I wasn't really asking you to do anything, but
It sounded aspirational to me.
I like that approach. It's what I always look at, what is the big impact of every decision that any individual or any group of people or any town or any county or any, it just comes down to that, your little decision will impact will have a big impact
For a long time.
for a long time. We see that in all the programs on the oceans, and that how many mile sludge thing that's gonna flow up into the Gulf
Yeah.
soon. This is all man-made problems, and it's pretty challenging. I'm voting for birth control. So, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Any other comments for the? Okay, then moving on. So the next steps, as I had said earlier, we will have 3 more public workshops like this, where as we get information, we can present them. And they are April 12th at 6:30 here, April 17th at 6:30 at City Chambers, because this room is being used. And then,
May 7th.
oh, I'm sorry, thank you. And then June 14th at 6:30 back here. So hopefully by June, we will have enough of the details and information to give everyone a good feel of where we're going. And so public comments, septic fill.
Is there really a date needed since we're having more?
Well, we like to put a date this way we know how to close them out, so.
We were just, I think the public comment slide on here was allowing people to speak, which we kind of did throughout the presentation.
Right, but I mean, I think we're taking, just like we did last time. So written comments in by next Friday or Friday after? Okay. So we'll take public comments till April 5th. And we'll see what comes in, and if necessary, update the FAQs to address them. And I think that's it.
Just to clarify, in those next 3 sessions, you're just going to, we're going to continue to consider all of these options, or will you start with the narrowing out?
Yes. The answer, hopefully, as information comes in, we can start to whittle things down more. But if we can't, it may be all 3 options again next time, But once again, we're spending most of our effort and energy right now on exploring option 3 with the county, keeping option 1 and 2 in abeyance, doing a little more on option 1 relative to what the site would look like and some of the complications, but not expending any amount of engineering on option 1 or 2 at this point. All right. All right, well, thank you all for attending, and same time, same place.
You want
So-
to? Session date.
So you have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Press is coming.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.